Turning more to rain, I fancy, as the day goes on. But certainly over the hills, there could be several centimetres across northern England and northern Scotland. Many western areas having a sunny day on Saturday, but it's going to feel cold wherever you are when you add on that wind. Really cold on Sunday morning with a widespread hard frost. Still some showers draped across eastern England, and there could be some icy conditions here as the showers continue to be wintry. Rain showers for Pembrokeshire and Cornwall, snow showers in northern Scotland, but many places elsewhere on Sunday will be sunny but very cold.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
We've already moved on. The WHO has designated the latest one the Omicron variant. Wait a minute, wasn't that the Avengers sequel, Avengers Age of Omicron? Anyway, if the COVID variants are all too mind-blowing for you, we also have, for your delight, a dancing cactus. It doesn't get any better than that, folks. A dancing cactus. He dances alone, not because he's standoffish, but because he's a cactus, so he can't do the cheek-to-cheek thing. What's the difference between a cactus and 10 Downing Street? One's got... oh, wait, I can't do that joke before the watershed. On the migrant tide, Boris Johnson's tweets don't float Monsieur Macron's boat. And as go the Solomon Islands, so goes the planet. Plus, Stump the Steyn, ask me anything via email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. But first, the news with Karen Roberts.
Thank you, Mark. These are your latest headlines. The Prime Minister has spoken to South Africa's President about the global challenges to contain the new COVID variant, which has been given the Greek letter Omicron. The UK has imposed strict travel restrictions on 6 African nations after its discovery. The World Health Organization says the variant carries a higher risk of reinfection and may have a growth advantage. So far, there's been 1 case in Belgium, but none have been found in Britain. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, says the situation is of huge international concern.
We are concerned that this new variant may pose substantial risk to public health.
The variant has an unusually large number of mutations. Yesterday, the UK Health Security Agency classified B11529 as a new variant under investigation, and the Variant Technical Group has designated it as a variant under investigation with very high priority.
4 teenage boys remain in custody after being arrested on suspicion of murdering a girl in Liverpool. Police say 12-year-old Ava White was stabbed to death in the city centre. A weapon is yet to be recovered. Police are now trawling through hundreds of hours of CCTV footage and have appealed for the public's help.
Know that Liverpool was very, very busy at that time. The Christmas light switch on in Church Street had happened shortly before that. So our first appeal really is for any members of the public that may have seen anything of significance and potentially even captured something on their mobile phones to contact police.
A man has died after his car was hit by a falling tree in Northern Ireland as Storm Arwen batters the UK. Wind gusts of up to 90 miles per hour have been forecast, with the Met Office issuing a red weather warning for parts of northeast England and Scotland. Motorists are being urged to stay off the roads, and London North Eastern Railway has posted a do not travel alert. French fishermen have threatened to continue blocking ports until December the 10th in the ongoing dispute over post-Brexit licences. Fishing crews prevented UK ferries from docking or leaving the port of Saint-Malo before targeting Calais and Ouistreham. They also caused disruption at the Channel Tunnel. At least 30 Extinction Rebellion activists have been arrested after blocking roads outside multiple Amazon warehouses around the UK. The climate group says it wants to draw attention to exploitative and environmentally destructive business practices. Amazon says it takes its responsibilities very seriously. That's your news update. Let's now get back to Mark.
What a week. As Karen just reported there, Extinction Rebellion are blockading Amazon fulfillment centres, just in case you were worried that the supply chain isn't quite sufficiently screwed up enough. If you're looking for a state-of-the-art gift that's guaranteed to arrive before Christmas, well, it's come down to a choice between 2 second-hand desktops with Windows 98 and this new Omicron COVID variant, which is already in Belgium. So it's guaranteed to be down every British chimney by Christmas Eve. For children, though, there's a new Boris Johnson doll. It's not very sophisticated. No matter how hard you pull the string, it only says one phrase over and over.
Forgive me.
Forgive me. Forgive me. Forgive me. Great. He's talking to the nation like he talks to his various wives. Incidentally, the new Boris Johnson doll isn't like your Barbie or Ken doll. The Boris doll is completely lifelike. He's got fully operational private parts and nothing else. He's not like Action Man. When you wind him up, he just winds down again.
The big world is very much my kind of place. It has very safe streets.
Boris's whole shtick is being a shambles. He has a €600 hairdresser flown in from Paris every week to make his hair look that perfectly dishevelled. His suits are handmade not to measure by a Savile Row tailor who measures his waist, then uses it for the inside leg and tosses the whole thing in a skip for a week. If you book him to give a luncheon speech at 1 o'clock, he turns up at 20 past and says, "So I'm supposed to be giving a speech about Northern Ireland?" No, PM, it's about education. Oh, never mind. It's a brilliant act. Or it was. What happened this week was that the Shambles Act became a real shambles. Boris's shambolic persona has itself become a mere shambles. of a shambolic persona. Very postmodern, very meta. He can't even shamble anymore. Now, that may not matter much for climate change or other pseudo issues, but right now, with what's happening in the Channel, some real leadership is required. Monsieur Macron, who's not above kicking a man when he's down, has now told Boris to take a hike and declared Priti Patel persona non grata in France. She's not welcome on the soil of the French Republic. If Macron was willing to treat every other would-be visitor to France the way he treats Priti, there wouldn't be a problem at all, would there? Most of us aren't very numerate. I said a few weeks back that if recent daily totals of over 1,000 a day on the south coast held up, it would be equivalent to half the newborn babies born in England and Wales each year, or a population the size of Belfast. If we move them all to Ulster, the answer to the Irish question would be Somalia. A century ago, the population of the British Isles, England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, was exactly the same as the population of British West Africa, what's now the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria. They both had about 45 million people. Now, Nigeria alone has over 200 million. The population of sub-Saharan Africa is now just over 1 billion. That population has doubled in the last 2 decades. According to the United Nations, it will double in the next 20 years to 2 billion, over 2 billion. 20 years, that's the period from Blair to Johnson, so not that long. In countries that can't support their present populations, huge amounts of surplus manpower will figure out the Mediterranean isn't far and that heading north to Europe is the entirely rational choice. So if we don't solve this problem when it's 1,000 a day, we're unlikely to solve it when it's 5,000 a day. Still in all, at least we're taking the COVID seriously. Are you a businessman in Johannesburg who was planning a trip to London until your country got, red listed because of the Omicron? Are you a Swazi or Lesotho who's had to cancel a visit to your cousins because you got red listed because of the Omicron? The good news is there's no red list on England's southern shore, no matter how many variants and mutations you're carrying. So come on in. Laura Perrins is a recovering barrister, but don't hold that against her. She's also one of the BBC's 100 women. But don't hold that against her. She's a trenchant and penetrating writer over at The Conservative Woman and in various newspapers. And we're delighted to have her. Laura, let me just ask you about this legal situation with the migrants. Alexander Downer, the former Australian High Commissioner in London, was asked about the Australian system, and he said cautiously that it's a different kind of legal regime in England. So in other words, everybody seems to know that if you get to the UK, you get to stay in the UK. Is that correct as a matter of law?
Well, I looked up the figures. They're on the government website, and I think it's the case that people are often rejected. I mean, it could be nearly 2/3, say, of asylum applications are rejected. But nobody is ever deported, or I think the numbers, before we left the EU, they were a few hundred were deported. I think now it's down to like 5 people. So, I mean, why we bother with the whole asylum application, I don't know. I mean, it obviously makes it's a big legal industry, because you may get your application rejected and then you're entitled to appeal. I think about 1/3 of those appeals are granted. But even if you're refused, the chances of you being deported are incredibly slim. So, that is why asylum seekers or these migrants are willing to take what is a very risky journey across the Channel, because although you mightn't be legally granted asylum, you won't be deported. Once you get to the UK, chances are you're staying.
Well, I mentioned that you were a barrister. Every time I switch on anybody other than GB News covering this story, you see a lot of these big shot quick QCs going on about the 1951 Convention, the Geneva Protocol and the Geneva Convention on this thing. 1951 was a completely different world. I mean, at that time, the continent that a lot of these people are coming from, with the exception of 1 or 2 pockets here and there, In 1951, the entire continent of Africa was the property of another continent, Europe. It was full of British colonies, French colonies, Portuguese colonies. Why is the world of 1951, as delineated in that convention and protocol, meant to apply to these completely changed circumstances 70 years later?
Well, I mean, it's true. It is odd, and frequently these are the lawyers that like to say that, you know, the law has completely changed now. You know, our US Constitution is a living instrument, for instance. So they very rarely rely on you know, a convention from that stage. But I mean, in fairness to the migrants, these are mainly migrants, I believe, coming from the east. They're coming from Syria and Afghanistan. And of course, they would say, well, you know, we wouldn't have to make this journey if you in the West hadn't completely destabilized our countries, right, with all of your mad military interventions. So, you know, that I'm sure is I mean, you can see a lot of them are young men, and they obviously don't seem to want to stay in countries that are now essentially wrecked because, you know, Western governments decided to destabilize them on a particular at a particular time. I mean, the other thing is, in terms of the legal system, I read an article in The Guardian, and the thing is, even if Priti Patel and Boris were to, you know, get tough and sort of bring in a pseudo-Australian model and really sort of try and stop them coming across the seas, there's at least 3 refugee charities that have said they would litigate that. So, you know, they are up against a very difficult legal system. And, you know, in a way, I'm tempted to say that Downing Street should call their bluff, bring in the refugee charities and say, OK, you give us a number. How many refugees do you think is reasonable for us to take? Say it's about 25,000, I think, have come this year alone. Say you said, right, we're going to take 30,000 or even 40,000. I sense a lot of those charities would still say that isn't enough, you know, even in the small landmass that we have here in Great Britain. And again, if Priti Patel said, OK, we're going to take 40,000, but you know what, we're taking them directly from the refugee camps in Syria and Afghanistan. And nobody that comes across the channel can stay because you're simply encouraging these poor people to take these incredibly dangerous journeys. If you want to apply for asylum, you can do so. We'll take them directly from the camps in Syria and Afghanistan. And again, I doubt that would be good enough for these particular charities. And what they don't understand is, you know, the current policy is just encouraging people to take this incredibly dangerous journey. And, you know, accidents that tragedies that happen during the week are inevitable. But trying to hammer out a deal, I sense, would be difficult because it's never enough. For a lot of people, it's just, you know, you could take 50,000, it still won't be enough.
Well, you know, we've been covering this story, Nigel Farage particularly, for weeks and weeks and weeks, and the London newspapers and the other TV networks were not covering it. They've been forced to cover it this week because 27 people drowned in the Channel. So they're covering it as a humanitarian disaster. We need to have the entire Royal Navy out there picking up these people as soon as they leave the French shore and then processing them expeditiously and bringing them into the country. Whereas the view of most citizens, that certainly the ones that I speak to, is that they just want this thing to stop. So isn't this in danger of becoming an issue like Brexit, where you have in Parliament no political party actively arguing for the position of half the British people on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. You know, the vast majority of people have always wanted, you know, immigration to be reduced. It is geographically a small country, but as I said, even if you tried to come up with a reasonable solution, you know, as you said, even taking big numbers like 40,000 people, I sense there's a lot of people on the politicians and parties and various groups on the far left would say that isn't enough. And you wonder why that is. Is their overall aim just to destabilise Britain as a whole? You know, half the time they're telling us how unbelievably racist and what a horrible place the UK is. So you wonder why they want to encourage, you know, immigrants or genuine refugees or asylum seekers, whoever they might be, to come here. Because, as I said, for the other 5 days of the week, you're telling us how horrible the place is.
Serious thing, Laura. The most racist countries in the world seem to be the ones that everybody wants to go to. Very odd, that. Laura's going to stick around to respond to some of your thoughts. So let us know what you think of Boris and his handling, quote unquote, of this migrant crisis. GBviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBnews. Plus, dancing cacti. We might blow the budget and have more than one of them. And Neil Oliver. He won't be dancing, he says, but I think I might be able to talk him into it. All coming up on GB News on a Friday night.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Let's get to your comments on our top story while Laura is still with us. Laura, this is a question from YJD Hillhead via Twitter, who wants to know why these men aren't building up their own countries. That's a fair point, isn't it, Laura? You look at these boats coming in and everyone on them is a fit young man who can't. It's too dangerous to stay in whatever country they're from, but apparently it's perfectly safe for all the women and children and grannies to stay in those countries. Why are we accepting first such a distorted population, and isn't the real answer for these guys to stay back home and fix their countries?
Well, I mean, that is probably the real answer. I think it's something I think it's easy to say, but I mean, sure, it'll cause a massive imbalance, here in Britain, and it must cause a huge imbalance for the countries they're leaving. I mean, exactly, the women and children do need them, and it's just very sad that they feel that they need to leave. But again, on the flip side, you say, Afghanistan in particular, obviously the Russians have been in there, the Americans have been in there. They haven't really had a good run at trying to stabilize their country. So perhaps these guys have just said, I've had enough. But, it'll be desperately sad for those countries to lose all of that energy, because they do seem to be the young men. And, countries need that kind of energy to, as you say, to rebuild them.
Well, if you look at Sweden, for example, which went the Angela Merkel route a couple of years ago when everyone was letting in Syrians, and they wound up within their 16 to 17-year-old demographic with a greater sex imbalance than China after 40 years of the one-child policy. So it's not a small thing. If you were talking about the overall number that these human rights barristers would like to see admitted, and these human rights groups, 35,000, 40,000, 100,000. If they're all male, that actually does create huge sex imbalances. Even if you thought it was a good idea to let in this number of unchecked immigrants, letting in an all-male group causes all kinds of problems, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it causes all kinds of problems, again, irrelevant of the nationality. And also, you have to think, where are these people, going to live and work if they are granted asylum and permission to work? Because you find it's very rarely in the places, the more upmarket places, if you will, Mark. You're not going to see them around the Cotswolds, and they probably won't be hanging around Kensington either. No. So usually they're sent to communities least able to deal with that kind of concentration of young men. You only have to enter a frat house in the United States, which thankfully I've never had to do, to see that, all that male energy, it can be a dangerous combination if it's the only thing there. As I said, it applies across nationalities. And they're always placed in communities that are absolutely least able to deal with it. I know Kent, for instance, have to take unaccompanied minors now, and the government have to ask the other councils to try and take these unaccompanied minors. I think there's something like 30,000 foster, a shortage of 30,000 foster placements. All these children are going to end up in children's homes, which we know are, not a great place to be. So, people keep talking about compassion, but I just don't see the compassion in placing these, sometimes children, sometimes young men in communities that are least able to cope with them. They're very rarely the affluent communities.
No, you may be right that the best place to put them is the Cotswolds, and it would concentrate people's minds. So let's build a new town for these refugees right next to Bourton-on-the-Water, and see how long those people are willing to put up with it. Lee on Twitter says, France doesn't care. And I don't blame them. It's us for not deporting anyone and giving them free money. Now, look, Monsieur Macron is obviously having some sport with this, and he does not think that Boris is a credible person. I think he called him facile today, or facile, which I think is actually a more profound put down in French than it is in English. He does not regard him as an homme sérieux. So did you think that Boris's whole spat with Macron over this is a bit of a distraction? This is a UK problem, and the UK should solve it, and we shouldn't keep whining that the French aren't helping us about it.
Yeah, well, I think the media on the right, certainly the papers are running, the right-wing papers are running it as a down with the French story, because that floats well in Britain. We do like to have sport along those lines. But look, it's a really serious issue. There are people's lives on the line here. And I still don't know why, or I still like it explained to me, in that, these people, they have reached a country of safety in France. So what is it? What is making them take that journey, as I said, across a very dangerous journey across the Channel to the UK, when they're already, as I said, in a safe country of France, and can claim asylum, can claim asylum there? I mean, the French authorities have been pretty useless. They're just literally standing aside while people traffickers are engaging in criminal conspiracies and putting some very vulnerable people, including pregnant women and children, on, dinghies basically, and putting them across in minus degree waters. So, I mean, there must be something about Britain specific, I think, that is having this huge pull factor for them to take that extra step across the Channel. And again, I mean, it is shocking that the French are just sitting back and letting it happen. You should be interrupting criminal conspiracies and criminal gangs, but they don't really seem very interested in doing it.
Well, it's interesting to me on that. Just as a final question, Laura, do we live at a time when your statue can be taken down because your great-great-great-grandfather happened to own a plantation in the 17th century West Indies, and so you're tainted by slavery? Human trafficking is really just a fancy name for what we used to call slavery. Some people pay up front in Africa, but other people don't pay up front, and in fact are put in indentured servitude in 21st century England, while we're all worrying about who owned what plantation in the 1600s. What is it about the moral aspect of this that has no purchase on the left?
Yeah, well, I mean, who knows? I guess because when you can pull down the statue, you get to point the finger at the white guy. I don't know. It says a lot in terms of where they want to actually direct their energy, as you say, in interrupting what is indentured servitude here and now. They should be focusing on that more than, again, pulling down a statue in New York. But I guess that's a much easier thing to do. It's really easy to pick on the dead guy because he's not around to defend himself, but to actually, say that we want to interrupt and get in the faces of these criminal gangs, these traffickers, who are selling girls and women into sexual slavery. That's a much more difficult thing to do, and sounds a lot like being tough on crime. And then you're really getting far onto the right, so you generally won't see them on that side of the debate.
Thank you for that, Laura. What a great line. It's much easier to beat up on the dead guy. That is so true, and I say that as someone who's been dead for about 15 years now. Thank you very much for that, Laura. You can read Laura at The Conservative Woman and lots of other great places. I mentioned these terrible supply chain problems, which may have your kid berating you on Christmas morn when he wakes up to find nothing in his stocking except a second-hand copy of my Cat album. So what else is out there? Well, Walmart, they own Asda in the UK. Walmart have been offering this dancing cactus. Take a look at this. Have we got this dancing cactus here? Oh yeah, what a groovy, that cactus knows its moves. That's a terrific cactus. The cactus doesn't only dance, he performs 3 songs, one in English, one in Spanish, one in Polish for children to learn. How nice and multiculti is that? A Polish grandma ordered the dancing cactus for her granddaughter and was horrified to discover that the Polish song is a rap number filled with F words about cocaine addiction. Quote, "The only thing in my head is 5 grams of cocaine, fly away alone to the edge of oblivion. Oh, F, I think I'll die." It's just the cutest thing when your 5-year-old dances around the room singing that. By the way, did you even know there was Polish rapping? I dig it almost as much as Azerbaijani thrash metal. The Polish rapper in question, Cypis, denies licensing the song to any dancing cactus. He's pretty sure he'd remember if he'd licensed his song to a dancing cactus. And it turns out, of course, that the dancing cactus is made in China in some factory around the back of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This dancing cactus embodies the state of the world in 2021. Chairman Xi in Beijing steals your intellectual property, and then the world's biggest retailer, Walmart, sells it all over the planet. The exhausted, clapped-out, flailing superpower, America, exports principally its exhausted, clapped-out, attitudinal pop culture, and even that is now monetized mostly by China. That's globalization. The Poles get lousy hip-hop, the Chinese get all the dough, and your kid gets a cokehead cactus for Christmas. Shall we play a quick round of Know Your Ensigns? Rishi Sunak is now offering tax incentives to vessels that fly the British Red Ensign. I'm surprised all these migrant boats aren't sporting it, but I love all ensigns. Red ensigns, blue ensigns, and if I'm anxious to get into a fight in a Dublin pub, even the old green ensign. Anyway, what's this particular ensign? Let's have a look at this in Know Your Ensigns. Oh yes, you're all stampeding with the correct answer. Sorry, the fully loaded Prius is already gone. That was the flag of the Solomon Islands in the 1970s. At the end of the decade, they became independent. On Wednesday, the powder keg went up, rioting broke out, and Australian troops were dispatched to support the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force. Why is it the Royal Police Force? Well, because the Solomon Islands have a queen, and her name is... anybody's guess on this, by the way? Anyone? Oh, yeah, Elizabeth II. Rings a bell. What's all the rioting about down there? Well, in the capital city of Honiara, 100 buildings in Chinatown have been burned down. So it turns out this is a story about China, just like the dancing cactus. In fact, when you peel away what's going on the surface, almost every story turns out to be about China. I'm basically a 19th century imperialist, 100 years past my sell-by date. We had a chap on a fortnight or so back who didn't like the cut of my jib when it came to talking up the British Empire. But empire is always with us. If it's not the Romans or the Portuguese or the British, it will be someone else. Right now, China has refurbished all the Indian Ocean ports of the Farage in Burma, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. It's buying up all the resources in Canada, in Jamaica. And it's been quietly subverting the Pacific islands that Britain decolonized in the 70s and 80s. So if you don't like Queen Victoria's empire, get back to us after a few years under Chairman Xi's empire. Here now is a former speechwriter for Mrs. Thatcher and head of the Danube Institute in Budapest. John O'Sullivan is with us. John, we were briefly talking about China, as Donald Trump used to call it, China. And he talked about it briefly in the spring of last year, and I thought for a moment we were going to address seriously the new hegemon on the planet. And then Donald J. Trump went away, and the whole business of China seems to have gone away. But as we just saw, it's still out there. Do you think we've left it too late, that they've just got fingers in too many pies now?
Well, it's never too late to respond sensibly. And the principal reason for the dominance of China, the rise of China, and now its threat of dominance, it isn't yet dominance, is that the US and the West in general has been asleep at the switch. It's allowed its economy to deteriorate. It's developed these huge debts, which I think are a terrible threat to us. And the only way we'll ever get out of them is starting to run an economy which doesn't have a deficit every year, that starts to accumulate surpluses and begins to pay down the debt. And once you start paying down the debt, you change things dramatically. You may have a huge debt. For example, we had a vast one at the end of the Second World War. We only stopped paying the debt of the First World War a few years ago. And if you want to talk about slavery, we paid off. We borrowed money on the international money markets in, I think, 1834. We bought out all the slaves, liberated them, in effect. We then had to pay that back. We finally finished paying that debt back in 2015. And so you can get out of these debt traps, but you've got to do it by actually earning your way better, running surpluses and paying back the debt. The other thing is, of course, you and I grew up in a world in which savers were respected. And that means that, if your country respects savers, they invest in you. Increasingly, we despise and cheat savers. And I think this is happening in a big way in all our countries, but particularly in the United States. We're running up, both in Britain and America, we're running up huge debts for utopian enterprises like net zero. Net zero carbon emissions, that cannot be achieved, in my view. I mean, it's a very likable kind of policy in the sense that it promises to do good in a general way to save the whole world, sure. But there's no way you can take fossil fuels, which now account for something like 80 to 85% of all world energy, and simply say, we're not going to have any of these producing emissions what is it now? The date keeps changing, as you know, but I think it's 2050 at the moment. Yeah.
Well, all this, but all this, No, but that doesn't work, John. I mean, you're right about, as you said, we only paid off the debt from the First World War a couple of years back, and all that. But that doesn't work, the net zero stuff, if only the do-gooders are doing it. For example, all the rubbish that we buy at Western retailers, to the point where 85% of everything in your house is made in China, that gives the Chinese the money to subvert places like the Solomon Islands and buy up all the politicians there. So in other words, China isn't beggaring itself for net zero. China is basically getting all the profits from the Western economy and using it to buy up everyone it needs to buy up in the Solomon Islands and in Sri Lanka and in Jamaica and in Canada and wherever else it needs people.
Mark, did I say that I thought that net zero could work? I don't remember saying that. I think that it plainly can't work.
Right.
And it's a mistaken policy. But because the thing can't work doesn't mean to say it won't be implemented and it won't do a great deal of damage in the course of failing. I mean, that was the case with the Soviet Union, really from 1917 until it eventually collapsed in 1989. Now, in this case, what we're doing is we're penalizing ourselves. We're embracing a policy of giving up fossil fuels, trying to do so, reducing our use of them at great cost, with no possibility of really being able to achieve it, while at the same time, as you say, the Chinese are not being expected by us. And they're simply refusing anyway to do this. And the Indians, who are our friends, they're also saying, look, we've got millions of poor people. If we want to bring them out of poverty, we cannot really give up the use of the cheapest and most effective energy we use. I'm not suggesting this is an easy question. I'm not denying there's such a thing as global warming. I'm simply saying this is no way to solve it. There is a logical difference between a problem and its solution. And the solution to global warming is not to try to completely reverse global warming. If you can't do it, it is to adapt, and it is to find ways of producing energy with less carbon emissions. The classic, therefore, reason to do, the classic policy here is the one that the Greens always have opposed, which is move towards nuclear power. And that's got to be part of the solution. It can't be the whole solution.
Well, you know something, John? If we were talking in sane times, or comparatively sane times, such as, say, early 1979, just as a for instance, you would be saying to me, well, the solution to a lot of the problems that are facing us is to elect a conservative government. A lot of Western nations, including the United Kingdom and Australia, have elected so-called conservative governments, and yet they are the ones who are galloping with even greater enthusiasm than the left, in the case of a certain prime minister, towards the unachievable goals. Do you worry that just as there isn't much faith left in the Church of England, there isn't actually a lot of conservatism left in the Conservative Party?
Now, you're right in saying that on a range of issues, the Tory party has let its supporters, natural supporters like you and me, down. That's perfectly true. You're right that they ought to be facing a bigger crisis, a big crisis of faith among Conservatives. But if you look at the next, and a lot of Conservatives who hate Boris, who essentially don't like Brexit, would like to go back to a kind of Mrs. Theresa May government, they've been agitating to get rid of Boris at the time. Our old friend Bruce Anderson has a strong piece denouncing Boris today. Now, I think that's all very well. But the fact is, Boris is probably the only popular Conservative in Britain today. The local election results, by-election results yesterday, show Labour is in big trouble, because Labour, by the way, has just taken the foolish step of endorsing the small boats coming into Britain. I mean, there's no doubt. The mood music on the Labour benches is, let's try to stop preventing illegal immigration. Let's give in to it. Let's oppose all of the policies that people might might suggest, some of which are flawed, some of which have hope. I'm listening with care to what Laura Perrin said just now. But the fact is that if the people hear that kind of thing and they say to themselves, well, Boris may be not doing a very good job, he may be letting us down here and there, but we think his heart is in the right place. He doesn't hate us. He doesn't hate the country. He thinks fundamentally he may be, as I think he is misguided in going overboard for net zero. He thinks that nonetheless, this is a country that's worth living in and worth supporting. And so that's the reason for his success. And it won't go away. And it won't go away quickly anyway, because he's got a majority of 80. And the Prime Minister with a majority of 80 is not easy to ditch.
You know these things better than anyone, John. That's a hell of a slogan. Vote Boris, at least he doesn't hate the country. And in the Western world today, actually...
Yeah, that's right.
No, he's certainly got that on the Corbynistas. Let me ask you something else, since you're sitting in Budapest, because it's something that's, we live in an age of madness now. It's not May 1979. The United States is super woke. Her Majesty's dominions, the rest of the English-speaking world, is trying to play catch-up with the wokeness. You have fellas like Monsieur Macron who say wokeness is an American disease and it's an existential threat to the French Republic, and we're not going to let les Anglo-Saxons destroy France with its wokeness. And then you move a little further east to Austria and beyond, and you find countries that start behaving like conventional nation states in pursuit of their own national interest, such as the one you're sitting in right now, Hungary. So we live in paradoxical times where in the Western world, you seem to get more Western the further east you go.
Well, that's perfectly true, because the people in Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, or throughout the whole of Eastern and Central Europe, they've lived under Marxism. They know what communism was like. They recognize the slogans, and then they know what the reality was behind those slogans. And what you find when you're talking to people, both in this part of the world, but also the people from Hungary and other countries in the West, they say, when we listen to the way the left, the woke intelligentsia, who now infest the major companies, the civil service, almost every aspect of national life in Britain particularly, but also in the United States, when they hear the logic, the arguments, the slogans of these people, they say to themselves, that was what we had to put up with between 1945 and 1989. We know the reality. And I would say the reason why I'm fundamentally, obviously, much more optimistic than you are, Mark, is because once a country has experienced living under Marxism, they become passionately anti-Marxist. Maybe not permanently, because they're replaced by a generation that didn't know this, but they are passionately anti-Marxist for a time. I don't relish the thought of the people who will follow me, because I won't be around to live through the worst of it, but discovering how Marxism really is. But when they discover it, they'll stop being they'll become tremendous conservatives and force conservative parties to begin to behave like conservative parties, which they're not doing at the moment. I agree.
That's a fantastic inspirational note on which to end, John. There is light at the tunnel. It's just that Stalin's going to be running the tunnel for the next 4 decades or so. But don't worry, we'll get through it. That's a fantastic... That's fantastic.
I'm sure he can't do it, but I mean, I'm not sure I will. But on the other hand, I'm optimistic.
No, I'm going to be a very happy 137-year-old. I can't wait for that. That's fantastic, John. John O'Sullivan from Budapest, where national politics is conducted very differently from in Western Europe and the British Dominions. Thank you so much, John. Coming up, GB News' very own Neil Oliver. Your chance to stump the Steyn. Ask me anything you want. gbviews@gbnews.uk is our email address, or you can tweet us at GBNews. That's next.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Stump the Steyn's upcoming. Shoot me a question, whatever's on your mind. gbviews@gbnews.uk. As I mentioned earlier, we're up to the Omicron variant now. It's called Omicron because it sounds so ominous. We're running out of letters in the Greek alphabet to call these variants and mutations after. These dastardly Greeks unleashing all these variants in the world, and now they're running out of letters to name them. Not sure if we're going to make it all the way through to Omega before Christmas. But it is, we're certainly going to be having a lot more of these things. I think they said they were going to name them after constellations in the galaxy. Well, we wanted to talk about all this with someone who recognizes that whatever the health threats from Omicron are, the threats to our liberties may be even greater. Here's Neil Oliver. You know him as an archaeologist, as an historian, and as a presenter right here on GB News. And you certainly know him from his stellar observation a couple of weeks back that throughout the Western world, citizens are now in an abusive relationship with their governments. Neil, welcome along. And are you a little worried that this Omicron variant sounds like ratcheting up a bit in the abusive relationship between the citizens and governments? I'm having a bit of a problem hearing Neil. Have we got volume on Neil? I'm not sure. I can't hear what Neil's saying. Okay, we're gonna try and sort that out. Hang on there, Neil. I'm going to get back to you when we've got the problems with the audio sorted out. The Omicron is apparently in Belgium. Well, that was a couple of hours ago. It's undoubtedly hopped on the Eurostar and will be arriving at St Pancras any moment. Is Neil there? Are we still having the audio problems? I'm hearing.
Are you hearing me, Mark?
Okay. Hey, Neil.
Hello, Mark.
Thank you for joining. Yes, I am. I hear your beautiful dulcet tones from your beautiful part of the country. Look, this abusive relationship between the citizens and the governments, Omicron, from what we've heard Sajid Javid saying in the House of Commons, they're gonna use the old Omicron variant just to make the relationship even more abusive. Is that your sense of it?
My growing cynicism about it, Mark, is that there was a crushing inevitability that we would end up in the run up to Christmas. I think especially there was a crushing inevitability that there would be some kind of complication that would throw everyone, throw Christmas into doubt. And here we have another variant. And I think the population, I'm sure that the majority of the population are just at the very least confused now by what's going on. As I understand it, with a virus, you would expect a coronavirus to mutate, to change as it goes along, because ideally a virus wishes to live peaceably in its habitat, which is to say within the human body. And over time will mutate to become something that it might be more transmissible, but is less dangerous, such that it ultimately ends up being something broadly comparable to the common cold, which is endemic and lives with us and doesn't cause us too much trouble. But my cynicism detectors are shivering with these hysterical headlines about this variant being touted as deadly, being a particular threat to people. I despair, and I've mentioned before that we're in what I would regard as a version of an abusive relationship with our government, and I think we are just being deliberately manipulated, troubled, made anxious, because a troubled and anxious population is liable to seek help, wherever it can find it. And if the government then comes forward and says, relax, we can now provide the solution to the problem, many people will leap at that opportunity. But my cynicism is in the red now.
Well, what's changed in the character of the people? Because if you go back a century to, say, the Spanish flu, which came at the end of a terrible war, that had cut a swathe through the population, not least in Britain and in France and other Western nations. People wouldn't have entertained for a moment the restrictions put upon them during the last 2 years by Western government. Not for the Spanish flu, which was far more lethal. So you get the feeling that something's changed in the character of Western peoples that they're willing to put up with this.
You say that, but if you look at the restrictions that were put in place, they are broadly similar. People were prevented from moving from town to town unless they had paperwork giving them permission to do so. The governments turned to scientists in the hope of finding vaccines to protect people from the Spanish flu. There were all sorts of restrictions and regulations put in place, but yes, it came at the end of 4 years of the most catastrophic, apocalyptic, dreadful warfare. It arrived upon a population that was so weakened, by the stress, by the conditions, by restrictions on food. Everything about the First World War had ground people down, brought people to their knees, and then off the back of that came an influenza, which ultimately killed, it's difficult to estimate, but it might be anywhere between 40 and 100 million people. So the influenza killed more people than the bombs and bullets and shells of the First World War. So people were concerned about it, but you're right, there's no doubting that we were a different population then. And I think people were more inclined to be up on their hind legs and looking for freedom and looking for the continuation of their lives. It's interesting that you mentioned the Spanish flu. It was called Spanish flu, incidentally, because most of the world, most of the countries that were involved in the war, their governments had clamped down on what the media could say especially when the influenza came in, because it was bad for morale. But Spain was neutral, and Spain, the Spanish journalists were able to report on what was going on with the virus in their country.
That's a brilliant point about Spanish neutrality. We're going to have to leave it there, Neil. But you pick that up on your show tomorrow night, and we'll be watching to see. Thank you very much. That is it for our show. See you next week. On Monday, I'll be in for Farage. Have a spiffy weekend. Alistair Stewart is up next after the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello. Storm Arwen is hitting parts of the UK this evening and hitting it hard. A red weather warning from the Met Office is rare, and we've issued this one tonight because Storm Arwen heads south through the North Sea. The winds are getting particularly dangerous across the northeastern corner of the UK, but everywhere seeing the winds picking up through the night and remaining very windy during Saturday. The red warning covers the coastal strip of eastern Scotland into northeast England, where gusts of 90 miles an hour are likely to cause structural damage and provide dangerous waves. There are also amber warnings across the northeast, but also Wales and the southwest, where gusts of 75 miles an hour are likely. And we also, on top of all the wind warnings, have some snow warnings as the weather turns